Okay, so I just watched the Knuckles series on Paramount Plus. It got announced like 2 years ago, something like that. It was basically forever ago, right before Sonic 2 came out, I believe. They knew they really had something. And a Knuckles prequel series sounded pretty good, but I think at the time I made a video on it saying that I was not very confident at all because of Camp Coral, the SpongeBob prequel series that came out, looked awful. I had this idea that Paramount wasn't going to put a lot of money towards this thing. Honestly, I was wrong. It was cooking. They were cooking this for a long time. And it came out like 2 days ago, right before Sonic 3, which drops in December. So this is just something to tide us over until December. Before I say my thoughts on the overall show, it's only 6 episodes, so I won't have that much to say. But I had heard that Knuckles wasn't going to be in this show, like, at all. And that kind of disappointed me. People weren't really seeming to like it, but then I saw some people saying that they actually did like it. So I thought it was going to be kind of a mixed bag. This show is about Knuckles and Wade, the human character, teaming up to do something. Knuckles was going to train Wade for something. It sounded like an interesting premise, you know? Not what I would have gone with for a Knuckles series, but it sounded at least interesting. I like Wade. I think he's one of the funnier characters from the other 2 movies. But I heard Knuckles doesn't show up that much at all, and it was just about Wade. And after watching the series, yeah, kind of. Alright, look, there's 6 episodes, and this is going to be non-spoiler, by the way. Knuckles is really in like the first 3 episodes as much as Wade. They pretty much share the screen. By the end of episode 3, it starts to be more about Wade, less about Knuckles. And in the last 3 episodes, it's pretty much Wade, and Knuckles is kind of in the background, talking to him, giving him advice, things like that. It was definitely a budgetary reason. You know, they gotta pay Idris Elba, they gotta pay a lot of money to CGI Knuckles in there somehow. So it's understandable that he was in the beginning a lot to get you hooked, and then he kind of takes a backseat to Wade's story later on. I understand why. And honestly, I think it was a good move. If they had to do this, bring Knuckles in for half the time, and then the other half can't have him, fine. I would rather them do it, backload Knuckles in the beginning to get us interested in their story, and then have him take a bit more of a backseat role in the last 3. Because Wade's story was not the most compelling fiction I've ever seen in my life, but it wasn't bad. It was semi-interesting. If you didn't know already, this is the one spoiler thing I'll get into, but you could pretty much tell from the trailer anyway, so I don't think it's a huge spoiler. The main antagonist of this series is the Gun Corporation, and the inclusion of them was so needed in this series. This series has high stakes for Wade, to a comical degree for Wade, pretty high stakes for Knuckles, and they married those 2 concepts together pretty well, I thought. The Wade stuff is more comic relief, and it's comic relief that I think does work for 5 of the 6 episodes. I'll get into that in a minute. And then the Knuckles stuff was still comedic, but he was more closely tied to the Gun storyline, them going after Knuckles, and it was a nice, how would you say, like, it was a very nice contrast. It was a very nice contrast of stakes, where you were sort of invested in Wade, sort of invested in Knuckles, and they flipped back and forth between the 2 pretty often, so the show never felt stale. So at this point in the video, I have to admit to you, this series has a lot of Sonic Easter eggs, references that I have no idea what they are. I've never played the Sonic games, I've only seen the 2 movies, and that is it. So, to tell you about the Easter eggs and references side of this series that you might be interested in, I've enlisted the help of fellow YouTuber Livius Wildcard. He's a very good friend of mine. His channel is awesome. Check him out, link in the description. He is going to tell you about the Easter eggs and references in Knuckles.
Hello, humans, demons, and whatever Candles is. I'm Livius Wildcard. So the Knuckles TV show just came out and I thought it was okay. I would not describe it as the quote-unquote worst Sonic media ever, but the show definitely had some problems. But I'm not here to review it, but instead, I want to talk about some references I was able to find. In the opening of episode 1, we got to see Knuckles destroy some boulders just like he did in the Sonic Heroes opening. The line "Sir Knuckles" could be a reference to Sonic and the Black Knight, where Knuckles was part of the Knights of the Round Table, and he also tried to kill himself. In the bowling alley, we see an arcade game called Golden Axe. If anyone grew up with any Sega compilations growing up, specifically Sonic Ultimate Genesis Collection, you had a good childhood. In the intro, there's a scene where Sonic is part of the main lead in the band, much like the original concept art for Sonic. A ski resort called Ice Cap is a reference to a level from Sonic 3 by the same name. We got to see Knuckles glide, and don't quote me on this, but I think this is the first time an adaptation did something like this. In Wade's training sequence, we got to see what appears to be the prototype for Green Hill Zone, as well as the bonus stages from Sonic 2. And lastly, from the Sonic OVA, we got to see Knuckles' hat. Those were all the references I was able to find, but if you're interested in my content, subscribe to my channel. With all of that being said, thanks for having me, Candles. It's been a lot of fun working on this part of the video.
Honestly, this show set out to do one thing, and that was to just be entertaining. And I was really entertained. I love the Sonic movies, the two that have come out so far, because of their tone. They are hyper aware that they are not the best show or movie on the market, not by a long shot, but they really lean into the humor, and it's like wholesome too. It's surprisingly wholesome. It has been so long since we've had a show or a movie that truly feels like it's for kids and adults. There's a lot of, easy humor in this show, a lot of slapstick, whatever. I know it's something I would have enjoyed as a kid, and there are still a few lines in here that I'm like, okay, they actually just said that. There's a lot of hells, damns, maybe an ass in there or two. Like, there's still some coarse language, whatever, but they use the word murder at one point. Like, this is PG. This is a kid's show. And they just talked about murdering someone. Like, it's PG with an edge. And that's something that was in a lot of 2000s content, early 2000s, what I grew up with. So I think the reason Jeff Fowler, the director, and all the other people who worked on this show are hitting a specific note with my generation is because it's reminiscent of those early 2000s projects, where it's ultimately for kids, but there's still a lot of lines that adults can grab onto. And Knuckles does have that in pretty good amounts. A lot of inside jokes you wouldn't get, a lot of adult humor you won't get unless you're old enough. And there is enough of Knuckles in this show to entertain a young child. And like I said, Wade was a pretty entertaining character as well. He's funny. He's a great actor. Props to this actor. I'll put his name on the screen right now. He is just as good as James Marsden when talking to a character that doesn't exist. Like, he is actually great. And not once is the illusion broken that both characters are in the scene together. He's fantastic. So my favorite episode was definitely episode 2, because it had a really good balance of Knuckles and Wade, probably the best of the entire series, followed closely by episode 3, which gets a lot more into Wade's side of the story, but it also had some really nice, heartfelt moments, and a surprisingly grounded episode that probably developed Knuckles the most in terms of his emotions, and not everything being, a fight to the death. The only time this series felt too weird was episode 4. I'm not going to go into what happens, but if you've seen it, you know exactly the sequence I'm talking about, the moment where everything just goes off the rails. And that sequence was funny when I watched it, because I was like, what the hell is happening here? But I don't think it's going to hold up super well in the rest of the Sonic universe pantheon, because that episode to me felt like it was bordering on when Taika Waititi has no one to stop him, and he creates a Thor Love and Thunder. And whoever made that decision to have that sequence in the movie, they're funny. I don't know if it's Jeff Fowler, I don't know if it's one of the writers, whatever. I think it's funny in a vacuum, but they gotta be kept in check a little bit. Because if whoever wrote or dreamed up the idea for that scene, that felt like a Taika Waititi, how crazy can I get with this kind of thing? And you don't want to get too crazy. So it was good in small chunks, but that sequence was really pushing my suspension of disbelief. Ultimately, I'm a huge fan of the Sonic movies because of their tone. They're very self-aware, they're very goofy, and that tone is completely preserved here. From minute one, I'm like, okay, this is just more of the Sonic movies. So if you liked the first two movies, you will ultimately really like this series. If you've got young kids, definitely show them at least the first 3 episodes, maybe the first 2. If they want to keep coming back for the other 3, you can do that too. But you could also just have them watch the first 3 episodes and it still feels like a complete series. I'd give it a 7 out of 10, maybe a 6.5. Maybe a 6.5 after you take into account the time that will pass for me to think about what I actually thought about this show. Honestly, it was better than most tie-ins for franchises like Marvel or Star Wars, but I would have liked to seen more of a balance between Knuckles and Wade in terms of not even just appearance, but character development. Also, Sonic 3, Keanu Reeves as Shadow, not a bad pick. Honestly, I think it would be a great fit. Now, I would have gone with Ryan Mitchum, but I understand he's probably a really hard get. Understandable.
I'm not in the sky, dick nips.